He saw her sitting barefoot by the side of the road, blonde hair tangled from the wind, a white dress clinging to her like a fading memory. The hem was torn, just slightly, like it had brushed too hard against reality. Her suitcase rested beside her, worn leather and rusted buckles, something that looked older than her, heavier than it should be. She didn't wave. She didn't even look desperate. She just lifted one finger as he passed, not to beg, but to choose. Something about that gesture pulled him to the shoulder. Maybe it was the way she held herself, like someone who had nothing to lose. Or maybe it was because, in that moment, neither did he. He didn't know she had run from wealth, that she'd left behind marble floors, family portraits, and a future scripted by someone else. Before we show you how a broke mechanic changed the course of a millionaire's life, without ever asking her name, comment where you're watching from, and follow for stories where strangers become everything we didn't know we needed. The road stretched endlessly through the southern countryside, framed by dry fields and the faded teal of old clapboard buildings that hadn't seen new paint in decades. The sky hung low in golden silence, casting everything in a warm, nostalgic hue, as if the sun itself knew these two souls were about to collide. Darius Monroe drove with the windows down, the wind doing what the broken AC couldn't. His truck was old, louder than it should be, but it moved forward, just like him. A faded photo was wedged into the dash. His mother in her Sunday dress, his little sister laughing beside her. It was the only thing that hadn't broken over the years. Once, Darius had dreamed in bold colors. A tech startup, clean energy apps, venture meetings in high-rises. But when the market turned and the investors pulled out, he fell harder than he ever imagined. Now, he fixed engines in a sun-bleached garage and counted gas by dollars, not gallons. Still, he drove with a kind of quiet pride. He had nothing, but he hadn't stopped showing up. And then there was her. Ella Remington sat barefoot on the roadside, legs tucked under her, back against a worn turquoise wall. Her suitcase looked more like something passed down than packed up, scratched, patched, but still clasped shut. Her dress was white and too delicate for the dust on her calves. But it was her eyes that said the most, pale blue and bruised by disappointment. She had walked away from marble floors and million-dollar dinners. She had slipped out of a life filled with names, titles, expectations. No one had asked what she wanted in years. Now here she was, waiting, not for rescue, but for something different. Someone different. She didn't know his story. He didn't know hers. But in the quiet stretch of that empty road, with the golden hour painting shadows across the cracked pavement, something unspoken passed between them. Her suitcase was her burden, his truck, his resilience, and the road, winding and unfamiliar, was the choice neither of them planned to make, but somehow knew they had to, together. The first few miles passed in silence. The hum of the engine filled the space between them, broken only by the occasional rattle of the old glove compartment or the rustle of wind against the open window. Darius kept his eyes on the road, hands firm on the wheel, saying nothing. He didn't ask where she was going, or why she had been sitting alone on the edge of nowhere with a suitcase and bare feet. She didn't offer an explanation either. They just drove, two strangers stitched together by a stretch of asphalt, and something neither of them could name yet. At a gas station outside a forgotten town, he pulled in slowly, watching the gauge hover on empty. She moved first, reaching into her suitcase and pulling out a crisp bill folded into quarters. "Let me get it," she said softly, holding it out. He shook his head. "Nah," he replied without looking at her. "You're the passenger. I got it." She hesitated, staring at the money in her hand as if unsure what to do with it now. "You don't even know me," she said finally, her voice barely above the murmur of the fuel pump. He capped the tank, glanced up, and shrugged. "You looked like you needed to keep going." That answer lingered in the cab longer than either of them expected. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of pink and burnt gold, he pulled off into a gravel lot beside an old diner, one of those timeless roadside places with flickering neon and laminated menus stuck to the table. They sat across from each other in a booth near the window. She ordered fries, just fries. He didn't ask why. She watched his hands as he stirred sugar into his coffee. Cracked knuckles, worn skin, the marks of years spent building or fixing or holding things together that wanted to fall apart. He noticed her fingers, too. Delicate, still holding remnants of a manicure, nails shaped like perfection, not purpose. A girl raised to be noticed but never heard. "Do you always pick up strangers?" she asked, halfway through a fry. "No," he said. "Do you always wait to be picked up?" She smiled, just a little. No. The silence that followed wasn't awkward this time. It was full of things neither of them were ready to say, but both were starting to feel. Outside, the sun continued to fall, and inside, something else began to rise. Walls didn't collapse all at once, but sometimes they softened just enough to let the light in. They drove for a long time after the diner, the sky outside now a deep, burnt orange melting into indigo. The silence between them was no longer cold. It was careful, like both were afraid to touch something fragile. The road ahead was empty, a ribbon of quiet stretched across a horizon neither of them could see beyond. Darius spoke first. Not loud, not suddenly, just enough to pull a thread loose. "I had a startup once," he said, eyes still on the road. "Solar microgrids, small systems for communities with no access to the grid. Investors loved the pitch, until they didn't." She looked over, waiting. He didn't stop. "They said my brand was too urban, that it wouldn't sell unless I got someone safer to front it, someone that made it look more trustworthy." He glanced at her. "You know what that means." Her lips parted slightly, then closed again. She nodded. "I do." They pulled out overnight, just vanished, all that work, all that hope. He paused. "Guess they didn't want someone who looked like me solving problems they were still profiting from." She didn't blink, just listened, eyes steady, expression soft. There was no shock in her gaze, only understanding. "Your hands," she said after a moment. "They don't look like someone who gave up." He laughed, a sound that landed somewhere between bitterness and grace. "They're just what's left." A few more miles passed in quiet. Then he asked, "What about you? What's a girl like you doing on a back road with a suitcase and no shoes?" She hesitated, fingers curling into her lap. "My name," she began, but didn't finish. Then, quieter, "My name isn't Ella." He didn't look surprised. He didn't ask for more. "You don't have to tell me the truth," he said, voice even. "But you don't have to lie either." She turned her face toward the window, breath catching slightly. "I left a house with 10 bedrooms and no soul. My father tried to marry me off to a man who called our staff the help, and smiled while saying it." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "They called it legacy. I called it suffocation. Every choice was made for me. Every dress picked, every word rehearsed. I felt like I was drowning in a life I was born into but never wanted." Her eyes met his. I wasn't running away. I was finally walking toward something. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The road stretched ahead, unbothered. The engine hummed, steady like a heartbeat beneath their silence. Then he said, "I get it." She turned, surprised. "You do?" "Yeah," he nodded. "Different cages, same door." She smiled through the tension in her throat. And for the first time since she stepped into his truck, she looked lighter, like the truth, even in pieces, had given her back something she didn't know she'd lost. And beside her, Darius drove on, quiet, but not alone anymore. Their stories weren't the same, but their scars had the same shape. In different ways, they'd both been cast aside for refusing to play the role the world expected. But now, together on a road neither of them had planned, something honest was finally beginning to unfold. They pulled into a quiet roadside cafe, just as the sky began to fade from dusk to dark. The place had charm. String lights swaying above a cracked patio, a jukebox humming faintly through dusty speakers, and a porch swing that creaked with every breeze. It was the kind of spot no one went looking for, which was why she chose it. Darius ordered 2 coffees and a slice of pie they didn't really need. She sat outside on the steps, suitcase at her side like always, watching headlights flicker past on the highway. For a moment, everything felt still. Then, without warning, a sleek black SUV pulled up behind his truck. Tinted windows, chrome finish, too clean for this place. Her shoulders tensed instantly. "They found me," she whispered, not in fear, but in certainty. The driver's door opened and a man in a pressed black suit stepped out, removing his sunglasses even though the sun was gone. He walked straight toward her. "Miss Remington," he said, voice formal but edged with relief. "Your father's been worried." Darius, still holding 2 paper cups, stood frozen. His eyes bounced between the man, the vehicle, and the woman he thought he was starting to know. "Remington?" he asked slowly. "As in oil? Hotels, the Remingtons." She met his gaze, this time without hesitation. "Yes," she said, "all of it." He didn't speak, just stood there, the steam from his coffee curling into the night like something searching for clarity. "I didn't lie to hurt you," she added gently. I needed someone to see me before they saw that." The man in the suit stepped closer. "Miss, we really must go." She held up a hand. "I'm not going anywhere." Her voice was quiet but resolute. "Not until I've earned something that's mine. Not until I choose it." The man hesitated, unsure how to respond. She turned to Darius, her expression softening. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by everything, but no one ever asked me what I wanted. You didn't ask for anything, you just let me be." He set the coffee down beside her suitcase and sat next to her. After a long pause, he spoke, barely above a whisper. "You already earned something." She looked at him, waiting. "You chose to be free." There was no applause. No music swelled. But in that moment, on a creaking wooden step between a diner and a highway, something real passed between them. For the first time, her suitcase didn't look like something she carried to escape. It looked like something she carried to begin again. Months passed. The memory of the roadside cafe lingered like a song that never quite faded, echoing through quiet mornings and long nights in the garage. Darius kept going, tools in hand, grease under his nails, the hum of machines surrounding him like familiar voices. Business was still slow, but it was steady now. Then one morning, a man in a blazer arrived with an envelope marked "Private Grant Approval." Darius stared at the name typed across the letterhead, Remington Foundation, Small Business Reinvestment Initiative. The amount was more than enough to fix the shop, pay off old debts, and hire 2 more mechanics. No note, no contact. But he knew she hadn't vanished, just stepped back into the world she came from to re-enter it differently, on her terms. And then, on a late afternoon, painted with the same golden hue that once touched a back road, she came back. Same suitcase, same quiet presence. But this time, she wasn't in lace and pearls. She wore jeans and dusty sneakers. Her hair was tied back simple and unpolished. She walked like someone who'd stopped running, not because she was tired, but because she finally knew where she was going. "I came back," she said, standing at the garage door, eyes locking with his, "because I found something I wanted to stay for." Darius didn't speak right away. He simply wiped his hands, stepped forward and unlocked the side bay, pushing the metal door open with the same slow steadiness he used the day he picked her up. "No more pretending?" he asked. She shook her head. No more pretending. They didn't embrace. They didn't kiss. They just stood side by side, looking into the space they'd both quietly built a piece of themselves into. Her suitcase stayed in the bed of his truck. Not because she needed to run, but because it didn't need to follow her anymore. It was no longer baggage. It was a reminder of the road, the choice, and the freedom she claimed the day she stepped off the shoulder and into the life she would finally call her own. He picked her up with nothing in his wallet and everything in his heart. No promises, no questions, just quiet understanding. And she, with a last name worth millions, left it all behind not to be rescued, but to be recognized. In a world that tried to define them both by what they lacked or what they came from, they found something neither of them expected. Someone who saw past the surface. Some journeys don't begin on maps. They begin when one person, carrying their own broken pieces, still chooses to stop, to listen, to offer space without expectation. If this story moved you, share it. Somewhere out there, someone's not waiting to be saved. They're just waiting to be seen. And follow us for more stories where love doesn't need a title, and healing doesn't need a destination, just a shoulder of a road, and someone willing to pull over.